kick off. So thank you everyone for joining us for today's HR Masterclass, where I'm joined by Kathryn Bonning, and we're going to talk about healthy hybrid workplace culture. So before we quick in, just as always, a quick disclaimer: the views here are our views and provided in good faith. We don't accept any liability for our views, and we do recommend you get expert advice if you feel that you need it. So just our general disclaimer there. So next slide, please. Thank you. So on the agenda today, we're going to be discussing what a healthy hybrid work culture looks like and consider the challenges facing organisations as they navigate hybrid working. We're going to discuss leading approaches to mitigate or reduce risk to company culture in the hybrid world. We're going to talk through our own approach here at Employment Hero to managing our workforce culture. And finally, we're going to hold a live Q&A to answer your questions. So just a reminder, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen to ask any questions that you might have, and we'll aim to get to them at the end. We usually send out some extra bits and pieces of info if we don't get to them. So if we don't get to yours today, that should be okay. We'll send out some stuff. So please make sure you put them into the Q&A box as we go through today. But first, let me give a massive welcome to Kathryn Bonning and thank her for joining us today. After 15 years working as a HR generalist with some of Australia's top corporate and professional services organisations, Kathryn has established a HR consultancy firm called Human Capital Consulting. She's excited and energised about the prospect of establishing new relationships with businesses seeking uncomplicated advice and solutions for their most valued asset, their people, which I'm sure we all agree with. Thanks for joining us today, Kathryn. It's great to have you, and I'll pass over to you.
Thanks so much, Lauren, and hi to everyone. Great you could be with us today. It certainly is an interesting topic to be invited to speak on. I'm sure most of you would agree that hybrid working has become a non-negotiable of today's employment contract. What was once a hard-fought battle to work from home has become a widely accepted practice, and thank goodness for that. However, amongst business leaders, observers, and critics, hybrid working has raised concerns that culture and leadership will suffer as a result. But the good news is it doesn't need to. In fact, this now permanent feature of the modern workplace creates opportunity to improve and enhance organisational culture. But how do we do that? Today, we will not only highlight the challenges faced by organisations as they navigate hybrid working, but share with you leading approaches to mitigate or reduce these problems. Next slide, thanks. But first, what constitutes a healthy workplace? Do a quick Google research and you'll be inundated with articles, blogs, white papers, and research, all claiming to answer this question. When I thought about this professionally and personally, a healthy workplace culture to me certainly wasn't about Friday night drinks, the free coffee, or the view from reception, even though all these things are really nice to have. It was more about the meaning, the alignment, transparency, something that ignited an emotional connection to the workplace and its culture. The book, The Culture Question: How to Create a Workplace Where People Like to Work, neatly summarises what I believe to be a healthy workplace culture. There's no point reinventing the wheel here. And I hope that these 6 pillars resonate with you also. As you will see on the screen, none of these are groundbreaking. In fact, this is what culture and leadership gurus have been focused on for many years. But perhaps it's even become more important as we transition, move, and adopt this hybrid style of working. So what are these pillars? Communicating your purpose and values. Employees are inspired when they work in organisations whose purpose and values resonate with them. Provide meaningful work. Most employees want to work on projects that inspire them, align with what they are good at, and allow them to grow. Focusing your leadership team on people. How leaders relate how leaders relate to their employees plays a major role in how everyone feels about their workplace. Build meaningful relationships. When employees like the people they work with and for, they are more satisfied and more engaged in their work. Create peak performing teams. People are energized when they work together effectively because teams achieve things that no one person can achieve on their own. And finally, practicing constructive conflict management. When leaders don't handle conflict promptly and well, it sours the workplace. Now, perhaps you were mentally assessing these as I talked through them, and there may be areas your organisation really excels well in and others not so much. But above all, I think you would agree that each of these pillars has the ability to impact your workplace culture. Next slide, thank you. So now we have a rough idea of what an optimal, healthy workplace culture can look like. What are the challenges that can get in its way? The list on your screen is certainly not exhaustive. And I'm sure many of you attending today have faced challenges unique to your own organisation, from what to do with excess office space to overcoming Zoom fatigue. But what it does is it provides a snapshot of the common gripes that I'm hearing from business leaders and owners, along with HR professionals. And some of these challenges are certainly not new. Let's take communication, for example, a constant battle. From who is responsible to how frequently do we communicate and to what detail. Communication woes have undone even the most sophisticated and expertly led organisations, which take a direct hit on their culture. Onboarding, on the other hand, is a challenge many of us observed or experienced during the pandemic. Upon speaking to a couple of small business owners recently, I was surprised to hear that some of their employees had left. What was the reason, I asked? Quite simply, it was the lack of connection and in-the-moment learning which contributed to their decision to leave. It was simply too difficult for them to come up to speed and find their place amongst the business. Now, today we don't have time to expand further on all of the challenges and the examples and what they might mean for your business. But hopefully these two challenges alone demonstrate the potential that the challenges that business will face. Next slide, thank you. Okay, so how do we combat these challenges? We're about to cover 5 approaches to help you and your organisation. Firstly, provide clear and consistent messaging with respect to your hybrid work policy. The biggest mistake in effectively implementing a hybrid model is for leaders to declare their future arrangement as hybrid while implicitly or explicitly signalling their bias for in-person work. Messages such as, oh, being in person is so much better in the office, or this meeting's so important, we ought to do it in person. It really dilutes the message and it creates confusion for the workers. There isn't a one-size-fits-all solution here, but having principles centralised from the top down will ensure equity and consistent planning across teams. Teams will then have to interpret the policy for themselves, although their interpretations must be equitable and in line with the organisation's principles and needs. Next slide, thanks. Expect there will be adjustments. Hybrid implementations will be subject to change as people learn what is effective for all stakeholders in a fast-changing environment. Accordingly, it is recommended that organisations set expectations that adjustments will be made through trial and error and learning. Doing so will allay anxiety about the permanence of suboptimal arrangements. For example, it might work best for a team to meet for several consecutive days in person for the launch of a product and then work remotely for the subsequent weeks. People will inevitably test and improve on their approaches. Next slide. 3, create a sense of proximity, both real and perceived. There are 5 key points here that I want to expand on because I actually view this as a really important one, because for so long we have operated in quite a physical environment by uniting in the office in a physical space. So creating that perceived sense of proximity and focusing on those who do decide to work either remotely or in a hybrid model is really important. So we want to unite through a shared purpose. When people are in the office, they can feel the energy of being together and experience a sense of common purpose by running into colleagues and chatting about what's been happening in the office. But when people are separated, some of this may still occur virtually, but it will be drastically reduced. Leaders will need to be intentional about articulating purpose, discussing the big picture, and ensuring people feel their work is uniquely connected and necessary to the success of the organisation. 2, instill a culture of accountability and fairness. Accountability is key to an effective culture because it reminds people their work matters, and it reminds them how important it is to the company and the team. If purpose is the big picture of how things matter, accountability is a mechanism which operationalizes how the work matters. Thirdly, manage conflict productively. We've already touched on this briefly before, which I think is a really interesting point. When people are at a distance, cultures do run the risk of conflict becoming less constructive. This is because issues may be buried or people just choose to avoid them, creating greater problems in the long run. Issues can be blown out of proportion because people make assumptions without adequate information. With hybrid working, leaders and team members will need to be attuned to potential differences and reinforce the need for healthy disagreement. Establishing protocols for disagreement and making room for differences of opinion are really good places to start. 4th, be visible and accessible. Be intentional about being personally accessible. Check in with team members regularly and encourage team members to have close relationships with each other by pairing them on tasks and assigning collaborative projects. And finally, promote transparency, something that I'm very passionate about. When people aren't in the office, they don't have automatic opportunities to pick up on what's happening through sitting next to someone at the desk, having a conversation in the hallway, or simply by running into colleagues that they might not normally see. As a leader, be sure you're keeping people in the loop, sharing constantly and making a point to ensure your team members are in the know about everything as much as possible and what's good for, what's safe and ethical and so forth. Next slide, thanks. Take onboarding seriously. You only get one chance. Even before our shift to hybrid working, I read that more than 1/3 of companies lacked a structured onboarding process, remote or otherwise. Furthermore, many organisations continue to underestimate how long it takes a new hire to be proficient in their role. The average onboarding program lasts 90 days, but according to Gallup's Creating an Exceptional Onboarding Journey for New Employees report, it typically takes employees 12 months to reach their full potential. Considering that poor onboarding can leave your employees with lower confidence in their new roles, worsened levels of engagement, and an increased risk of jumping ship when they see a new, more exciting position elsewhere, these statistics are concerning, especially for companies hiring remotely. Therefore, businesses are encouraged to set clear goals and measures for success. And I emphasize the word measure here because this is the one thing that's often failing or missing from setting goals is the actual measurement. A very simple one to remember is the SMART methodology. Create a multi-departmental onboarding team. So utilizing different people with different sources of information in the business. They may have been there a long time, a short time, creating a really diverse mix of people to support that person. And finally, as a leader, if you are the manager, providing support through the onboarding journey. It may sound simple, but from a HR professional's viewpoint, I do have to agree that onboarding is often an afterthought and poorly resourced. So we do need to get it right. Next slide, thanks, Jules. Finally, the fifth thing I'd like you to think about today is making performance expectations known. Even before the pandemic, performance management was a pain point. Layer in hybrid work and performance management is poised to go from bad to worse. Why is that? Well, employees working remotely often feel they aren't trusted to get their work done and don't have clarity on performance expectations. And because we no longer see each other in the office every day, gone are many in the moment opportunities to provide performance feedback, see what employees are working on, and collaborate and innovate. The key to successfully creating a culture of performance acceleration in a hybrid environment is intentionally around expectations. This starts at the organisational level, clearly articulating performance expectations across the business, cascading expectations down to teams and individual employees, and then providing adequate support so employees can meet expectations. Sadly, unclear goals and poor communication were a big part of the performance management problem even before hybrid. So there are 5 things that we've just talked about today, and hopefully you were able to capture the key points out of each of them. Next slide, thanks, Jules. As I was researching and reading articles myself on this topic, the 2 words which came through time and time again were intentional and human. In supporting a healthy workplace, both in the office and wherever else your employees may be that day, organisations and its leaders need to act with intentional effort. In other words, acting with clear purpose and focus. From sharing that update to the entire team, and not just those who you saw in the office today, to checking in on your new starter regularly. None of this set and forget business. A healthy workplace culture relies on leaders and their actions, not just their words. And finally, and what is actually one of my favourites, is to be more human, a phrase I have long used with my own teams. And how do we do that? Well, quite simply, by being authentic, being empathetic, and being adaptive. And I wonder if there's another HR masterclass in the making with that topic alone. So in closing, whether you have the ability to implement or influence some of these suggestions, I hope that there was some value for you and your organisation in today's session. And if there are questions afterward, I'd be happy to answer those. Thanks, Lauren, over to you.
Thanks so much, Kathryn. And yes, just a reminder, guys, if you do have a question or something pops to mind as we continue through, or something that Kathryn has shared with her fantastic wisdom, please pop it into the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screens, because I think we'll have some time to go through some Q&As and maybe get a question or two out of you, Kathryn. But for now, love to take you through a case study on Employment Hero, because I'm sure that many of you are aware that we are a remote first employer, and so this topic is really close to my heart and to our hearts here at Employment Hero. So next slide, please, Jules. Thank you. So what does culture at Employment Hero look like for a remote first employer? There are some really key things that we're very conscious of to ensure are embedded within our culture and that we live and breathe every day. So here at Employment Hero, those key things are psychological safety. I think we can all agree, particularly out of COVID, psychological safety is one of the most important elements for all businesses, but particularly in those remote first and hybrid workforces and organisations. There's unique challenges in remote and hybrid work, and though you think it would be easier, sometimes it's harder to put your hand up and speak when you're on a video call. So here at Employment Hero, we try to ensure that we have a psychologically safe space for our people to contribute, communicate, and bring their whole selves to work. So we do this through a few ways. We ensure our managers have one-to-one catch-ups with their people. At Employment Hero, it's expected that all of our managers catch up with their teams individually and team members individually at least once a week or once a fortnight, depending on what works for them. But we also encourage teams to have regular connection points and not just work-based connections. It's really important that we get time just to hang out and connect as a team and do something fun and, bring in those water cooler moments that you normally have in the office where it's not just work all the time. Feedback and communication that is transparent at all levels of the business is critical. And I think that Kathryn touched on this before around transparency. It is absolutely fundamental in a hybrid and remote first setting. And it helps our people know where they fit in our organisation relative to our strategy and the contribution that they're making. But it's also critical to have a transparent culture so that information is available to our people so that they have access to the information to make decisions quickly and iterate on different ideas. We're also firm believers in regular feedback. So we always ask our people to send us their questions or do a quick check-in. We use our engagement surveys and our happiness pulse check surveys in our platform, but we also, at our all hands or company updates, we also make sure that we have a section called Slido where our people can ask us questions and we answer them in a live setting. Our company values are our common language and we live and breathe them every day. They inform the way that we work and they help us in Employment Hero to stick to a societal contract no matter our background, location, or our culture. And that all underpins creating a psychologically safe workplace. For coaching and development, one of the big things that we do, and for all organisations, it's really important for us is that we ensure we have ample support and opportunity to invest in our people and their learning and development. So that's something that we're really conscious of here. And we make sure that we have dedicated L&D programs to support managers in navigating remote work. We make sure our L&D programs are accessible to everyone via remote means, and that we record them so that you can also participate in them asynchronously and still have access to that L&D. We also ensure that we're clear and transparent around our objectives and key results as an organisation. And that goes back into making sure that our people know where they fit so that they're feeling fulfilled in their work, but also engaged in what they're doing and how it's contributing to the broader aspect of our organisation. That transparency and intentional communication around where we are, where we fit, and where we're going is really key. Pulse checks and time for connection in hybrid and remote workforces is absolutely critical, as Kathryn said. So one of the things that we're really aware of keeping as part of our culture is an element of fun. We do this by making sure we have regular time and spaces for our teams to connect. You should see our dedicated animal channel in our Slack channel go off every time there's a new dog or cat or fur child or even a turtle added. It's a lot of fun and a way for us to connect without just talking about work. But we do work hard and ensure that we have time and spaces for those non-work things and conversations as well. This year, we're also hosting a global gathering. We do regular all-company meetings to ensure that we have those regular touch points with our senior leadership team, and people are hearing from our leaders around where we are as an organisation and where we're going. The final thing I'd like to share with you around what we do here at Employment Heroes is shout outs and recognitions, reward and recognition. One of the things you have to do as a remote company is be really intentional about how you communicate and how you reward and recognise people. We use our platform every day to do shout outs for our colleagues. We have dedicated celebrations channels in our Slack, and we have awards linked to our values to recognise those going above and beyond, because like I said, our values are our social contract and we live by them every day. Our recognition programs are accessible to everybody so that we can encourage peer-to-peer and manager-to-employee recognition so everybody has access to it. And as a remote first company, having a robust and visible recognition and reward program is critical to us because great performance should be recognised and it can be easily missed in a hybrid and remote workforce. So it's important it is visible, transparent and accessible. Next slide, please. So we do a lot as a remote first company, and we use our platform a lot. So I want to take you through a little bit of how we use our platform to achieve this remote work. So shout out to Jules for kindly supplying us with some screenshots from her version as an employee using Employment Hero. But I would just note that not all features are available to all regions and customers. So if you have any questions, please reach out. The first thing I'd like to take you through, which goes back to our reward and recognition. So as I said, recognition is key. On our landing page in the Employment Hero platform, the first thing that you see is announcements, shout outs, and recognitions. It is there when you log in and it is visible. We have new things popping up every day. We welcome our new starters. We share birthday and celebration announcements. And this is where we say thank you to our colleagues for their help and recognise a job well done for someone going above and beyond and meeting our values. So as you can see there, we've got one of the recognitions, which is linked to our values, and you get hero dollars that you can spend. We've got a happy birthday message, and we've got a shout out for peer-to-peer recognition. And like I said, that links into, you can also link into some hero dollars, which can be spent in our benefits section of the platform. So that's one way that we utilize our platform to make sure that we're living our values every day and we're rewarding people. They get to pick something that's nice for them. They can access something that is meaningful for them. So it's accessible, visible, but also tailored to the individual that you're trying to reward. Next slide. As I said earlier, one of the other core pillars of how we operate in Employment Hero is ensuring that we have psychological safety. And we do this through regular one-to-one catch-ups between managers and employees. All our managers use our coaching section in the one-to-one template setting in the coaching section facility of our system so that we can have really great conversations with our people. You can tweak the templates, and we tweak the templates to fit the needs of the team, but we always include a check-in on your happiness. So what would your happiness score be between 1 and 10 today? We always include that. Any roadblocks, and we also continue to have a conversation around your development. So they're the 3 key things that we keep consistent for everybody, but then teams can tailor the template for themselves so that it works between the manager and employee for their own particular division. So this is a great example of how Jules and her manager Taz use it. Another great tool is our feedback feature. So this is also something that is really important in remote work, is to give spaces to people who may not necessarily be as comfortable to shout out in a very visible way. So one of the ways that we support everybody accessing our shout out and recognition function is through feedback. So this is something where you can give peer-to-peer recognition or provide a manager with some great feedback on their employee, but it's done in a little bit more of a private manner. So it's a really great function that we have that helps everybody to be able to participate in the recognition and feedback culture that we have. And as I said, we also have L&D is really important, and we have an integrated LMS function through Go One that interfaces with our platform under the Learning tab. So we use this in conjunction with our one-to-one conversations to help support the development of our people, to give access to different avenues of learning. And finally, we live and breathe our values. You can see what our values are at Employment Hero on the screen, and that is what makes us a successful business and able to be remote first. Our values are in our platform for everybody to see and filter to our reward and recognition function to ensure that not only do they stay front in mind, but we have tangible engagement with them. So I think we're over to some questions. So Kathryn, I might get you to pop back on screen and we might start having a look at some questions and answers if I can get my cursor to the right part of the screen. So thank you everybody for sending through. We've got quite a few questions. So we might start with one I saw come through earlier, Kathryn, where it's a really good question, because managing remote, you have screens and sometimes it's really hard for people to kind of traverse that screen barrier. So the question we've got is, when meeting virtually from home, can I request for cameras to be on? And if it's rejected, how firmly can I ask? We don't have a policy around this. So what would your advice be?
Yeah, and this is an interesting one to hear that perhaps there's still situations where people are reverting or simply not choosing not to put their screen on. So a couple of pieces of advice here. To the employee, if you're the manager, you want to really speak to the heart here around, in a normal setting in the office, we don't talk behind closed doors where we can't see each other. So in order to enable a really good conversation, particularly if you're only seeing or hearing someone's voice, you aren't able to read body language, you aren't able to pick up on any cues that are really important in this hybrid environment. It's also important, I wouldn't recommend going in firm to start with, but asking open-ended questions. So, again, appealing to their kind of sense of reason around perhaps are there any barriers preventing you from, not putting your video on? I've observed or I've noticed each time we catch up, we seem to not be able to see each other. My preference is when I'm talking to my team that we're able to convey in the most kind of personal fashion as possible without being in a physical sense, and see if you can encourage them to open up, but be mindful not to just ask a closed question where they're just going to shut you down. It is an interesting one at this point if they're still not comfortable with putting their screen on. So it might take a little bit of softly to encourage them to talk about what the actual underlying issue is, but also can, reaffirm that you're there to assist and help and support. Just as an example, very early days in one of the organisations I worked with, people simply didn't put their cameras on because they didn't have the right technology. And it was a quick fix. So that was able to be sorted.
Yeah, I think that's really an important point is for us at Employment Hero, not having your camera on can sometimes be challenging and a sign that there is a check-in needed. So it's a really good time for you to have a conversation with your employee to go, is everything okay? As you said, is there any barriers for you? And then also finding those spaces for them to be able to contribute in different ways while you navigate that process and those conversations as well.
Yeah.
But that's a fantastic question, and thank you so much for helping us answer that one. So we've got quite a few questions here, so I'm going to try and find some that we might be able to get into. So this is a great one, and it's from Kerry. So thank you so much for putting your name, Kerry. What are some of the innovative solutions you've seen to improve that spans an office where there is a hybrid model?
Good question. Yes, and I noted down some things while we were going through the session. A couple of suggestions, and again, I'm not aware of the infrastructure that sits within your business, so some of these might be completely new or already tried and tested. Slack, Teams. I found Teams really beneficial throughout the whole entire COVID period. There were all different types of teams, different subjects, and it was so interactive. We even had at one stage one of the employees who logged on every single day at 8:30 and invited anyone to join him for, a coffee. And I think that was just a nice way to continue that informal communication amongst peers. Some days 2 people showed up, next day 15. It's also really important for the leader of your business, CEO, managing director, whoever it is, to have a voice and to continue to share information. So whether you do that through a monthly CEO address, a virtual town hall, or it's a town hall in the physical sense at the office, but where people are able to tap in, that inclusive aspect is really important here, that all people are getting the same message, the same communication. Some of the other innovative ways that I've used personally in the past is something called lessons learnt. So in one of the businesses I was working in, it was very project focused. You can imagine with projects at times they can go a little bit pear-shaped, and there are lessons learnt from that project perhaps not being executed on time. Maybe there was resourcing issues. And so providing a forum to talk about those lessons learnt was super helpful for a lot of people in the business, because naturally humans like to learn from other people's mistakes. So we always found that they were really well attended. And finally, information that's not mundane, that's of interest. It could be celebrations, wins, updates across the business that people will genuinely find interesting, that are good for them. And look, I still think the old email is a great forum to send. Just don't, send hundreds of emails a day. But there's lots of different methods to keep the communication flowing throughout your business.
I agree. I think one of the key things I've learned moving particularly into a hybrid and remote first employer is that you need to be really intentional in the way that you communicate and think really clearly about what are you trying to communicate, who are you communicating to, and understand all of the different channels that you have and be very intentional. So, but like you said, there's lots of different ways to engage people. But I think this leads really well into one question that I've seen down there, which is people appear to be a bit sick of Zoom meetings and Zoom hangouts. And I think everyone can agree there is a little bit of Zoom fatigue going around. So what are some other things that we can implement for people for some fun, short virtual sessions, social events, things like that? How can we combat that Zoom fatigue?
Yeah, look, I think it's absolutely right. So picking your audience, picking the forum, the purpose, the activity. And again, I have to draw on the inclusive aspect here. People have got to be mindful when they're scheduling these sessions. There was a lot of the sessions are being scheduled at 5:30 at night. Now, for some people, that's core family time, that's dinner time, that's I've got my kids and everything to sort. So again, looking at the span of the working day and asking yourself the question, at what point is it going to allow for a variety of people to turn up instead of the same kind of demographic because it suits them. Some great things that I've seen in the past, I'm sure these are all being tried and tested again by people, is, the quiz and actually using the tools, the technological tools to allow for collaborative sessions where you can actually work together online and put things up, depends what type of industry you're in. The coffee thing I talked about, that was a real hit because it was very simple. It was very simple, and it was you were able to opt in, opt out. But you need a real leader in your business to take charge of that. And this young man in our business did that. So, it's I think I would just be mindful of your audience and more so the time of day that you're doing things in order to increase participation.
I agree. Absolutely, you do need to be mindful of the day, particularly, in Australia where there's so many we work quite often, Australia and New Zealand together. And so you've got 5-hour differences between New Zealand and Perth, and you do need to be very mindful about that. I think one thing I'd add for the questioner as well is one thing that we do at Employment Hero in our team is we also use Slack to check in and check out of the day. And at the end of every day, we've got like a little bot that goes to us around what was one thing we really were happy with today or we're celebrating. And it's not always work related, it can be personal, but that's just another way to help engage people. That's not necessarily on a call or anything like that, but still keep those connection points coming together.
And I just wanted to make one other comment, Lauren, just on this. I encourage people to be very wary about how much time they're putting into that social arrangement if they haven't prioritized what's more important in that employee, which is their career development, their feedback.
100%.
Actually talking to them as an employee, as a human, to get to know them. And I've seen that sometimes all too often where the social aspect takes first place and the other stuff is just an afterthought, maybe because it's a bit harder because you actually have to put in the effort. But that's actually the most important and most valuable thing you need to be doing with your time.
I 100% agree. Those check-ins and time with your people is absolutely essential, and you do need to be having those conversations regularly with them. This one's an interesting one, and I think that the hybrid and remote work can lend itself better to certain industries, and not everybody can work from home. So
Mm.
we've got someone here asking, Owen, thank you for putting your name to your question. Our production workers can't work from home and sometimes feel disadvantaged versus our office staff who can. How do we avoid those feelings developing into an us and them culture? And more broadly, I think I'd add, how do we manage those trickier situations where part of your workforce do have to be face-to-face and part can have a little bit more flexibility? How do we help navigate those situations?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind for me is ensuring that your workforce, even though there's two very distinct groups of people, that there's a real appreciation for what each other does. And I mean, one of the organisations I worked at previously was really pro around taking their office staff into the production centres of the organisation, getting to know the people that are actually, assembling a product, or, working in a warehouse, whatever it might be. And it was really about bringing two groups of people together, united under one kind of common purpose. And whatever that organizational objective was, there was just a real coming together. And I think that is crucial. And I know that may not necessarily be an easy thing to do straight up, but I think through careful planning and even selecting certain people from the office environment to visit, a warehouse center or a production line, whatever it might be, really garners like an appreciation for the whole business, and really breaks down that, I hate to say this, but or just those people in the office or those people, it shouldn't be like that. So wherever we can, we've actually got to unite people together. And again, that inclusive piece is so big here. Office workers often have more structured hours in comparison to people who might have, work in a warehouse where their operating hours could be, quite extensive. They could start at 6 a.m. and finish at 8 p.m. Might have shift workers. So again, how are we integrating communication, connection, collaboration between those two workforces that accommodate the differing scenarios for each group?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't really have anything else to add to that. That was a fantastic response. Thank you. The next one I've seen here, and I think this goes back to what you said in the previous response, around making sure that we're having those one-to-one connections and talking about career development. There's a question here from Juliana. Thank you for putting your name to the question, Juliana. It's, how do you deal with employees that struggle talking in their one-to-ones about how they're doing in their roles? How do we handle the responses such as I'm fine, I'm okay, yes, okay, those one-word responses that we sometimes get?
Yeah.
And to that, help our people open up.
Yeah. I think the person who has the influence is the manager. So I'd be looking squarely at the manager first and foremost around, do they actually know how to engage and run a one-on-one in a kind of best practice manner? So straight away, my inkling here is that this manager potentially is asking questions that are closed. So of course, the employee just says, yes, I'm fine, good, no thanks. We've got to change the dialogue and how we ask questions. And that's really going to come from a place of curiosity, from real intent listening by the manager over the course of that employee's time with us, to pick up on things that they may not be necessarily comfortable with sharing, but our role as a manager is to encourage them to talk about that. But you won't get that if you ask really kind of closed questions that just shut down the conversation essentially. I'd also be, and I don't know the context of the business that you work in and what you've got available, but using a framework to work from when it comes to having a one-on-one check-in. And there'd be some great resources that we could share with you around, following, A, B, C, D, that allows you, if you don't have the confidence as a manager, to follow that in order to make sure that the conversation is productive, it's of value, it's of benefit. You really should get to the point where it's just a really beautiful, free-flowing conversation, because you've built it on trust, on transparency, on the fact that you've committed each week or each fortnight to having that conversation. So you're also not letting down your employee. So lots of tips and tricks there that I'm happy to share afterward too.
I'm actually really happy with what you've just said in that last bit around transparency and consistency, because building trust with your employee is so critical to being successful in having these types of conversations. And sometimes as a manager, we do need to show a little bit of authenticity and vulnerability to our people as well, because it's scary to share some more, if it's a more personal thing, or if they're struggling because they don't want to let you down. So it comes back to the idea that we've been discussing, being transparent, which is also sharing a little bit of yourself with your employee, and creating that psychologically safe space for people to feel comfortable to share as well. But this links in nicely with the next question I found is, what does transparency and communication across organisations look like? Because this is a consistent theme in hybrid and remote work. We talk about transparency all the time, but practically, how does it work, and what does it look like?
Look, I think it all depends on the size of your business, because you need to be able to, in many ways, control the messaging. So, for example, if a CEO of a business goes to his leadership team, but he fails to engage two of them on that day because they're working from home, or he fails to follow up on them, very quickly information goes through to half of the organization and doesn't find it to the other half. And then they often find out through general chit chat amongst peers, colleagues, who say, oh, did you hear there's so-and-so's happening in that department? Or did you hear there's going to be a restructure in finance? And all of a sudden, bang, trust is lost. The other leadership team member has lost face with their team but it wasn't their fault. So you can see how quickly, if there's not a consistent approach to sharing information and being transparent across a business, it can create rumors, it can create discontentment, it can create frustration amongst people. So, again, very much looking at, you mentioned it earlier, Lauren, it was great, what's the information, who's the audience, how are you going to share it, and just taking your blinkers off and remembering that you have to forever remember that there are two groups of people that now exist in your organization. And on any one day, you cannot control who's going to be in the office and how many people will be working from home. But this even extends, pre-COVID. One of the things I noticed often in an organization with important messaging, they would forget the people who were on parental leave. They would forget the people who were on personal leave. And again, they would often be the last people to hear and find out through a very roundabout way. So you have to look at your whole organization, think about every single person, and make sure that all are included in that information, whatever it is.
100%. And it's so critical. It comes back to, I classify it as having a documentation culture, because you document everything down, all of your announcements, your strategies, your OKRs, your conversations are written down for somebody who may not be there, or may be in a different situation or a different time zone, can come back and review later. So practically for us at Employment Hero, if we've got an all hands, we record it and post it in our Slack channel so that anybody who is away can go back and hear the message straight away when they are able to do it. But it comes back, that's completely right. You've got to think about your audience. You've got to think about those people and accessibility to the information is so critical in creating that transparency in the workplace.
Yeah.
I think we've got time for maybe one or two more, and there's one here, and I think that this speaks to a lot of businesses. There's been a lot of challenges in businesses transforming themselves into hybrid work, and there has been resistance for some. So one person asks, what are some of the tips for influencing senior managers that may be a little bit more traditional in their perspective around remote work, and kind of helping navigate the waters of showing the benefits of hybrid work and what it's offering, and how it is great for attraction and retention of talent?
Yeah. One of the lessons I've learned in my career is to avoid going in with your own opinion to begin with.
Yep.
There was a great saying I learned many, many years ago, and I forever held it in my brain to use, is facts over feels. And what that essentially is very much what I said before. Don't go in with your emotion, don't go in with your opinion, go in with the facts. There is a bounty of information available at your fingertips at the moment that points to the benefits of hybrid working. It points to the retaliation by the job seeker who no longer wants to work for the organisation who doesn't offer it. So the statistics, the facts, the research, it's all there. Be selective, particularly, again, who's your audience? What are you trying to convince them of? And I've experienced this myself. I've had a boss previously when I used to work from home occasionally, just couldn't believe I would work from home and would really make a point about it. And that individual has now transitioned to loving hybrid work. So it sometimes also takes a bit of patience, but I would be presenting the facts and using that as my weight in order to influence the individual. But know that sometimes it is a bit of a journey. You can't just go in there like a bull at a gate and bulldoze them over straight away.
It's that old saying, if you get more flies with honey, sometimes you do need to be a little bit more mindful and strategic in the communication of getting these things across.
Absolutely.
I think for the questioner as well, I'd also add, don't forget to do your exit interviews and also look at your recruitment data as well. What candidates are you losing out on because you're not offering hybrid work, and help your leadership understand some of the tangible impacts to your day-to-day as well. And, are people leaving because of this or because of different points as well? They can be really important data points that are more tailored to your own organisation as well.
Yeah. And I think leverage, if you do them in your own workplace, if you have engagement surveys or pulse checks, but it's not even hard if you don't have the budget to engage a provider. It's just to do something yourself, like a survey monkey or the like. There's plenty of great tools around these days. And again, I think let the evidence point to what the people are saying, and certainly that should speak for itself, particularly if the leader really cares about its people and the organizations moving forward.
Absolutely. Well, I think we might wrap up the questions there. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. They have been absolutely fantastic, and I'm sure everybody has gotten a lot out of that conversation and answering some questions and hearing your thoughts. So we will share the slides around. Absolutely. There are a few questions for that. So you will get those. Reach out to Kathryn if you have any questions. Our details are on the slide in front of you. You'll now have a little poll asking you how you found the session today. So please take a second to click yes, no, somewhat how you found it. And thank you so much for participating and joining us, Kathryn. That was absolutely fantastic.
And thank you, Lauren, for hosting Anti Employment Hero. And hopefully everyone else got something out of it today.
Thank you. And see you next time, guys.